The rescue. Blood. Blood everywhere. The acrid stench of burnt flesh and the metallic tang of blood assaulted Dr. Robert Porter's nostrils as he crouched over the ruined body of Princess Inez, ignoring the frantic shouts and chaos erupting around them. Maimed and torn apart, the alien princess was barely recognizable, blue blood spurting from horrific wounds as her life drained away onto the polished marble floor. The king and queen were already dead, torn apart by the anti-bomb that had left the celebration of Inez's coming of age in tatters. Dignitaries screamed in fear, guards rushing to protect the aura alight, while their princess lay dying, ignored and abandoned. Humanity was in a precarious position, barely tolerated on the aura homeworld of Elysia. Dr. Porter, the lone human surgeon permitted to practice in aura space, knew that any perceived misstep could spell disaster for Earth's tenuous diplomatic ties. But he couldn't just let the princess perish. Gritting his teeth, he pressed his hands into the worst of her wounds, blood spurting between his fingers as he fought to staunch the bleeding with primitive first aid equipment. Alien hands grabbed at him, trying to drag him away from Inez, disgusted that an inferior human dared to lay hands on royalty. He shrugged them off, focused only on keeping the princess alive until the aura medics arrived. But even the best aura doctors were helpless in the face of her devastating injuries. Their knowledge and equipment were meant for aura physiology, not the shrapnel-mutilated wreck of flesh that Inez had become. They argued and hesitated, precious seconds ticking by as the princess slipped closer to death with each labored breath. Dr. Porter knew there was only one chance to save her now. He demanded access to the human medical technology he had brought for the trade negotiations, technology far more advanced than the Aura realized. It violated every Elysian law for a human to utilize his foreign tech on their planet, let alone on their future ruler, but Inez would die without it. Dr. Porter had come prepared to demonstrate the marvels of human medicine, armed with 3D organ printers, regenerative nanobots, synthetic skin, and artificial blood, never imagining he would need to use them like this. The aura doctors resisted until Inez's vital signs began plummeting into oblivion. Left with no choice, they watched in horrified awe as the human and his machines fought to drag Inez back from the brink of death's abyss. For the next 18 hours, Dr. Porter pushed himself past the point of exhaustion, a relentless force of sheer determination and medical genius battling to save the alien princess. He rebuilt her organs from scratch, microscopic robots knitting ruptured blood vessels and shattered bones back together, pumping her full of artificial blood to replace what she'd lost. Dr. Porter smiled wryly. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say on Earth. When you're light years from home, with no one to rely on but yourselves, you learn to make do and innovate. The tech I used to save you, we developed it for frontier colonies that might go years between supply shipments. There's no room for waste or extravagance when lives are on the line. Inez shook her head in disbelief. And yet you bring such miracles to the stars, freely offering to share them with us. I see now how wrong we were to dismiss humanity as primitives. There is so much we could learn from you if only my people could see past their own prejudices. But even as understanding blossomed between them, Dr. Porter could feel the weight of suspicious glares boring into his back whenever he walked the palace halls. Aura nobles whispered behind their hands, their faces twisting with disdain as he passed. He knew it was only a matter of time before their simmering resentment boiled over into open accusation. When the hammer fell, it was just as he feared. Inez was locked away, torn from his care and placed under guard to protect her from his vile human influence. Never mind that he had saved her life twice over now, rebuilding her body from the ashes of tragedy. To the Aura, he would always be a threat, a corruptive taint seeking to warp their princess's mind with his foreign ways. Confined to the human compound, Dr. Porter paced like a caged animal, his mind churning with helpless fury. He knew Inez was still fragile, her immune system weakened by the massive trauma she'd endured. Without proper monitoring and care, she was a right target for opportunistic infection. The Aura doctors, for all their vaunted superiority, had no notion of post-operative care for such extensive injuries. If Aeneas fell ill now, they'd be just as helpless as they were the night of the bombing. When the smuggled note arrived, Dr. Porter's blood ran cold with dread. Scrawled in Aeneas' shaky hand, it confirmed his worst fears. Aeneas was sick, burning with fever as infection ravaged her barely healed body. The Aura physicians were worse than useless, insisting on plying her with traditional remedies that did nothing to halt the bacterium's relentless advance. She was dying by inches, and they were too proud and stubborn to admit they were failing her again. Dr. Porter crumpled the note in his fist, his teeth clenched with tenacity. He had to reach her, had to save her before the Aura doctor's pig-headedness killed the princess he'd fought so hard to save. Aeneas was depending on him. Humanity's future hinged on him. Failure was not an option. Dr. Porter would save Aeneas, even if he had to fight his way through every guard in the palace to do it. The Aura had no idea what lengths a human would go to save a life, but they were about to find out. The breakthrough. Dr. Porter's fingers flew across the keypad, inputting the override codes he'd memorized during his time in the palace. The door to the human compound slid open with a soft hiss. He glanced at Dr. Sorensen, who nodded grimly. "I'll buy you as much time as I can," Sorensen said, his voice low. "Just get to her." Porter slipped out into the night, his heart pounding. The Aura servant's robes felt alien against his skin as he made his way through the shadowy streets. Every rustle of leaves made him flinch, expecting to be discovered at any moment. At the palace gates, he kept his head down as he passed the guards. Their eyes slid over him, seeing only another faceless servant. Inside, he navigated the labyrinthine corridors, relying on muscle memory from countless rehabilitation sessions with Aeneas. A hand grabbed his arm, and Porter nearly cried out, but it was Mira, one of Aeneas' handmaidens. "This way," she whispered, leading him through a hidden passage. "The princess is fading fast." When they reached Aeneas' chambers, the stench of sickness hit Porter like a physical blow. Aeneas lay on her bed, her skin ashen, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The Aura doctors huddled nearby, muttering amongst themselves as they mixed useless poultices. Porter pushed past them, ignoring their indignant squawks. He pressed his hand to Aeneas' forehead, feeling the heat radiating off her in waves. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. "I'm here," he said, already unpacking his smuggled supplies. "I'm going to make you better." The Aura physicians protested as Porter began administering a cocktail of human antibiotics and Aura anti-inflammatories. He worked tirelessly through the night, monitoring Aeneas' vitals and adjusting dosages as needed. Every cough, every labored breath felt like a personal failure. As dawn's light began to filter through the windows, Aeneas' fever finally broke. Porter sagged with relief, exhaustion washing over him. He sat beside her, watching as her breathing steadied and her color began to return. When she finally opened her eyes, truly awake for the first time in days, she smiled weakly at him. "You came for me," she whispered. "Always," Porter said, taking her hand in his. A new understanding. In the days following Aeneas' miraculous recovery, a tangible shift occurred between the humans and the Aura. The princess's survival had defied all expectations, and whispers of Dr. Porter's dedication spread through the palace like wildfire. Even the most staunchly traditional Aura couldn't ignore the fact that a human had saved their future queen, not once, but twice. Aeneas herself was a changed woman. Her brush with death had given her a clarity she'd never had before, and she began to assert herself in ways that left her advisors floundering. She took a particular interest in the study of human technology, demanding that Dr. Porter teach her everything he knew. Porter found himself spending long hours in Aeneas' company, discussing everything from medical techniques to Earth's history. He was struck by her thirst for knowledge, her insatiable curiosity about the world beyond Elysia. "I want to know more about your people," Aeneas said one evening as they sat in her garden. The scent of alien flowers filled the air, their bioluminescent petals casting a soft glow around them. About what drives them, what they value. Humans are complex, Porter said, choosing his words carefully. We value freedom, individuality, creativity. We're driven by a desire to explore, to push boundaries, but we're also deeply flawed, prone to conflict, greed, and fear. And yet, you fight for us, Anais mused. You risk your life to save mine. Porter smiled faintly. Because despite our flaws, we also have an incredible capacity for love, for compassion. We don't abandon those we care about. Anais looked at him, her gaze intense. And you care about me? Porter hesitated, feeling the weight of her question. Yes, he said finally, I do. The reckoning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of political maneuvering and intense negotiations. Anais used her newfound authority to push for closer ties with humanity, much to the chagrin of the Aura nobility. Her vision was one of unity, of mutual respect and collaboration between their species, but not everyone shared her optimism. A faction of the Aura elite, led by the influential and xenophobic Lord Vale, began to openly oppose Anais' reforms. They saw humanity as a threat, a dangerous influence that would corrupt their way of life. Tensions simmered just below the surface, threatening to erupt into violence at any moment. Porter found himself thrust into the heart of the conflict, caught between his duty to Anais and the growing animosity of her enemies. He knew that if the situation escalated, it could spell disaster not just for Anais, but for Earth as well. One evening, as Porter was preparing for another round of talks, Mira burst into his quarters, her face pale with fear. Lord Vale is plotting to overthrow the princess, she whispered, her voice trembling. He's gathering support among the nobles, and I fear they may move against her soon. Porter's blood ran cold. We have to warn her, he said, grabbing his coat. We have to stop him. But it was too late. As they rushed to Anais' chambers, the sound of clashing swords echoed through the halls. Porter burst through the doors to find the room in chaos, guards fighting off a group of armed rebels. Anais stood at the center, her eyes blazing with determination as she wielded a sword with surprising skill. Get down, Porter shouted, tackling Anais to the ground as a blast of energy whizzed past her head. They hit the floor hard, and Porter grunted in pain as the impact knocked the breath from his lungs. Anais struggled to her feet, her sword flashing as she parried another attack. I won't let them take my throne, she said fiercely. I won't let them tear our people apart. Porter scrambled to his feet, grabbing a discarded weapon and joining the fray. The battle was intense, but the rebels were outnumbered and outmatched. One by one, they fell, until only Lord Vale remained. He sneered at Porter, his eyes filled with hatred. You think you've won, human? This is only the beginning. Our people will never bow to your kind. Anais stepped forward, her expression cold and resolute. This is not about bowing to anyone. It's about survival, about building a future where we can thrive together. Lord Vale spat at her feet. Traitor, he hissed. Without a word, Anais raised her sword and brought it down in a swift, decisive strike. Lord Vale crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the survivors. Then, slowly, Anais turned to Porter, her expression softening. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Porter nodded, unable to find the words to express the depth of his emotions. In that moment, he knew that whatever the future held, he would stand by her side, no matter the cost. A new dawn. With Lord Vale's rebellion quashed and Anais firmly in control, the Aura began to cautiously embrace the changes she had fought so hard to implement. The path to peace and unity was not an easy one. There were still many who harbored deep-seated mistrust of humanity, but slowly progress was made. Anais and Porter worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between their species, organizing joint initiatives and cultural exchanges. human engineers shared their knowledge of terraforming and resource management, while Aura scholars taught their human counterparts about the intricacies of their advanced sciences and philosophies. As the months passed, a fragile but growing alliance began to take shape. The once distant dream of a united galaxy, where humans and Aura could coexist and prosper together, was starting to become a reality. Porter, now a trusted advisor to Daenerys, found himself deeply invested in this new era of cooperation. But despite the progress they had made, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. One evening, as he and Daenerys sat together in the garden, watching the twin moons rise above the horizon, he finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at him for weeks. "What's next for us?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "We've accomplished so much. Where do we go from here?" Daenerys looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the moons. "We continue to build," she said simply. "We forge new alliances, explore new frontiers, and push the boundaries of what we can achieve together." Porter nodded slowly, but Daenerys could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We've come this far because we believed in something greater than ourselves," she said gently. "And I believe that together, there's nothing we can't accomplish." Her words resonated with Porter, dispelling the last of his doubts. He smiled, squeezing her hand in return. "You're right," he said. "We've already proven that we're stronger together than apart. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it side by side." The legacy. Years passed, and the galaxy entered a new era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. The alliance between humans and Aura grew stronger with each passing day, becoming a beacon of hope and cooperation for other species across the stars. Daenerys and Porter became symbols of this new age, their partnership hailed as the catalyst that had brought their people together. They continued to work tirelessly, dedicating their lives to building a better future for all. As they grew older, their bond deepened, evolving into something more profound than mere friendship. They became confidants, allies, and eventually, partners in every sense of the word. Together, they founded the Galactic Council, a governing body that brought together representatives from every species in the galaxy. The Council's mission was simple: to promote peace, understanding, and cooperation among all sentient beings. Under their guidance, the galaxy flourished. Conflicts that had once seemed insurmountable were resolved through diplomacy and mutual respect. New worlds were explored and colonized, their resources shared for the benefit of all. As the years turned into decades, Daenerys and Porter's legacy became firmly entrenched in the annals of history. Statues were erected in their honor, and their names were spoken with reverence by generations to come. But for Daenerys and Porter, the true reward was not the accolades or the monuments. It was the knowledge that they had made a difference, that they had brought hope to a galaxy that had once been divided by fear and mistrust. And as they stood together, gazing out at the stars from the balcony of their home on Elysia, they knew that their journey was far from over. There were still new frontiers to explore, new challenges to overcome, and new alliances to forge. For as long as they had each other, there was no limit to what they could achieve. And so, hand in hand, they stepped forward into the future, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together.